Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Utah State Board of Education's KEEP Exit training. In this training, we are going to review the purpose of the KEEP, go over logistics, review each question item by item, and also talk about the accommodations associated with this assessment. The kindergarten entry and exit profiles are intended to inform various stakeholders such as parents, teachers, and leadership on the academic and social emotional development of entering and exiting kindergarten students. The information that we gain from this profile will be used to help us better understand the influence and impact that full-day kindergarten has on those at-risk students in both short-term and long-term. It also provides opportunities for data-informed decision-making in regards to the cost-benefit analysis of early learning initiatives. The structure and setting of the KEEP assessment is any educator who has received training, they are able to administer the KEEP. The good news is by watching this recording, you are considered to have received training. For the exit, there are items that are to be administered in both small group and individual settings. Questions number 6 and 7 are small groups. Small group items and questions 1 through 5 and 8 through 13 are those individual test items that need to be administered in one sitting to ensure that the KEEP is administered in a standardized fashion. The testing window for KEEP exit is the last 4 weeks of kindergarten. So if your school gets out on May 25th, you would count back 4 weeks, and that would be the testing window. There isn't a specific date that the state sets for when the testing window opens. It's all relative to what your district or charter school calendar looks like. However, for data entry, all data has to be entered into the data gateway by June 15th. The exception is for those few schools in Davis and Jordan School District that are year-round. If you reach out to your assessment director, they will be able to provide you with clarity around when your data entry deadlines are for your data to be entered into the data gateway. If you are not familiar with the website, it is https://datagateway.schools.utah.gov. We will go over the data entry component more at the end of the presentation today so that you are familiar with how to input your data. For this exit assessment, there are 13 scoreable questions on both literacy and numeracy, and there are 8 observational questions for social emotional. The individual questions collectively take about 20 minutes for administration, and there are 2 small group questions, questions 6 and 7, total take about 20 minutes as well per small group. And these items are recommended to be administered during the regular school day. For logistical and planning components, we have a few suggestions for how to administer those one-on-one portions. You can take 1 or 2 kids per day, per session for the 4 weeks of the window and administer the entire individual portion to those 1 or 2 kids per day. If your school or district decides to hire a substitute for a few days to cover your classroom, then you can assess, but that is a district or charter decision. There is no money available from the state to pay for the cost of those substitutes to cover your classroom. A third option would be to end kindergarten a few days early and schedule individual testing appointments with your students and have their parents or guardian bring them in. There are the 12 days allotted per board rule that can be set aside for kindergarten assessment, but again, this is a district or charter decision, and those days have to be calendared in advance in order for you to take advantage of them. And then one model that we've seen used in some places throughout the state is that there is a certified and trained testing team that goes out to all the locations in the district or test all of the students in the charter schools. But again, that is a district or charter level decision that will have to be made based on what is best to meet the needs of your situation. To prepare for administration, all assessors need to read and understand all of the information that is included in the test administration manual. There are 2 manuals for the KEEP exit. They are both light blue in color, and at the top one of them says Test Administration Manual and the other one says Student Materials. So in order for the KEEP to be considered standardized, you must follow the instructions exactly as they are printed in the Test Administration Manual. If you deviate from the scripted text that's in the manuals, then it's going to affect the standardization overall of the KEEP assessment. Also, to prepare, you need to work with the administrators at your school and parents of your students to establish a testing schedule, whatever method that you decide works best for your school or your parents. Then you need to obtain and set up your testing materials, which include the copy of your test administration manual, 1 copy of the student materials book, and a copy of the scoring sheet per student. Now there is the option to score directly into the data gateway as you are administering the assessment, or in the back of the test administration manual on pages 50 through 53, there is a paper copy of the score sheet. You will need a pencil and a blank sheet of paper for student use. Typical counting manipulatives that are used in your classroom, you need 10 of them. And then also in the test administration manual, there are 2 texts for the emergent reading question number 5 and the writing paper that you will need for question number 7. When it comes to questions 9, 11, and 12, those are located on pages 63 through 66 in your test administration manual. You can make a copy for each student, or you can take 1 copy, put it in a sheet protector, and give your students the dry erase marker to mark on the sheet protector and then simply erase it when that student is finished. Or if you want to rather give each kid their own copy, you can also do that. And then you will need a privacy divider, something to keep students who are sitting next to each other from looking at their neighbors' papers. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into the individual item overview. The first section in the assessment is the literacy section. There are 7 questions for this portion, and it covers listening comprehension, phonemic awareness, phonics, emergent reading, and writing skills. And we're going to go over each of these questions one by one. For each question throughout the assessment, there are standards, the grouping for test administration, materials, instructions, scoring information, and also the accommodated instructions. On this question, you'll see right at the top of the page, it lists the standard alignment for speaking and listening .k.2 and also .6, and then it also covers the standard reading literature K.1. So that right there tells you which standard this specific question addresses. Under the instruction section, any text that is presented in bold in the test administration manual is what the teacher will need to read aloud. Anything that is listed in italics is an action that the teacher should take. So it just kind of helps to clarify what the process is for test administration. So for question number 1, there are no required materials, and the teacher is going to follow the script and read aloud those parts in bold. So it says, I am going to read you a story about Antonio's walk in the springtime. Listen carefully as I will be asking you questions at the end. Then the teacher would read that text that's there in bold. And when you're done reading, you pause and say, now I'm going to ask you about the story. In complete sentences, tell me 2 ways Antonio knew it was spring. So then you would pause and wait for the student to respond. You'll see after that text in the manual that there are a couple of prompts that you can provide. One, if the student does not answer in a complete sentence, you can say to them, start your sentence with, Antonio knew it was spring because. your turn, and then you would wait for the student to respond. And you can also prompt if they don't give at least 2 examples. You can see in the sentence after you read the paragraph that it says, in complete sentences, tell me 2 ways Antonio knew it was spring, but you are free to prompt for more details by asking what else did he see, hear, or feel. So after you read the passage and the student responds, then you move on to scoring that item. For this particular question, there are 2 separate sections that have to be scored. The first one is oral language responses. This score is based strictly on the student's production of their response. It does not include the content of those responses. So did the student answer in a complete sentence? With or without a prompt or a sentence starter. So if they were able to answer in a complete sentence without a prompt, then they receive 2 points. Excuse me. If you had to provide them with a prompt or a sentence starter, then they would only receive 1 point if they answered in a complete sentence. And then if they answered in only words or phrases or did not provide a response at all for oral language, they would receive 0 points. The second section for scoring is listening comprehension. This is where you score the content of the student's response. If they answered with at least 2 accurate examples of signs of spring from the story without prompting, then they would receive the full 4 points. If they were only able to provide 1 accurate example without prompting, then they would receive 2 points. And then if they cannot provide any examples at all, or they don't respond to the prompts that you give them, then you would score them at 0 points and continue to the next question. If you have any of these students who have specific circumstances, then you would follow those accommodations that are listed in the purple section. This particular question, for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, the teacher or an interpreter can sign to the student, and the student is able to answer in sign language or any other form of communication that they use. And then students who are nonverbal would also be allowed to use their mode of communication, an assistive technology that is used daily. Question number 2 is phonemic awareness, initial, medial, and final sounds. For this question, it covers standard RF.2, RF.K.2.D, which is isolate and pronounce initial, medial, vowel, and final sounds in 3 phoneme words. A couple of things to note for question number 2. You can use any position term that students are familiar with, such as beginning, initial, first, or medial, final, ending, or last. So whenever you see the star in the test administration manual, that's just a reminder that you can substitute any one of those terms. So if you use beginning sound in your classroom and not first, you can say, listen to the word mat. The beginning sound in mat is What is the beginning sound? That way you're testing the knowledge that your children have, not their familiarity with the specific term that you may or may not have used in class before. So you're free to substitute any one of those items that are listed on the page in place of what is printed there. Also, when you see the letter in between the 2 slanted lines, that just means that you say the sound of the letter. So if it's M, you would say the first sound in mat is What is the first sound? Just extra clarification if need be. If you are taking this information back and training people at your district, just make sure that you cover what those slashes mean so that they are better able to administer the assessment. Excuse me. For this question, you give the first part. The students tell you the first sounds that they hear in the words, and then there is a discontinue rule. If the student is not able to isolate any of the first sounds correctly, then you discontinue this question and move on to question number 3. We assume if a student struggles to isolate beginning sounds, they're going to have even more difficulty with the final sounds or the middle sounds, because the beginning sounds are the easiest ones to identify. And for sake of frustration level with your students, if they aren't able to do beginning sounds, we just skip and move to the next question. Scoring for this item, each correct sound that the student provides is worth 1 point for a total of 6 points possible on this question. And there are accommodated instructions for students who may be deaf or hard of hearing or nonverbal. You'll see in the accommodated instructions piece that some questions may not be applicable for students who have specific disabilities, and it will say that if not applicable, they will or they may skip this question. There will be a place in the data gateway to indicate that the question was not applicable, but be sure that those students who the question is not applicable for have that IEP or 504 documentation to support why that question is not applicable. If it's just a regular classroom student and they're struggling and they cannot do the beginning sound isolation piece, then you would mark those responses incorrect within the data gateway. Please do not mark not applicable because they were unable to do it. It didn't apply to them. The question still applies to regular students without the 504 or IEP accommodations. So please only use that not applicable in the instance of accommodated instructions for all questions that you see not applicable as a choice. Question number 3, phonemic awareness. This is phoneme segmentation and substitution. Similar to question number 2, you are allowed to use a position term that the students are familiar with. And when you see the slashes, that just means to make that letter sound. Something that is prefaced here at the top in the instruction section is that students are allowed to tap out the sounds or do other actions if that is something that you do regularly in your classroom and your students are accustomed to that, just so long as you aren't coaching the students or encouraging the students to do so. If they do it on their own, great, they're applying those skills and strategies that you've been working with them on, but please don't prompt them, oh, remember we touch our arms, we tap the sounds out. That is not appropriate and it will affect the standardization of the assessment. So you're going to read the instructions to the student. Listen to me as I say all the sounds in dog. D-og. Now you say all the sounds in dog. The student will respond. If they make an error, repeat the sounds and ask them again. And then you will say, now I will change the last sound in dog, g, to t. The new word is dot. You're going to go on and ask them to change the sounds in map and bun. And then for scoring, the student receives 1 point for each correctly segmented sound in the word map for a total of 3 points possible. And if they say the new word man correctly, they receive another point. And same thing with bun and the new word of bug. For accommodated instructions, this question also might not be applicable for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and if so, they will skip this question. And then there are instructions to follow for students who are nonverbal. Question number 4, phonics and word recognition. This one you will need materials from the student materials book on page 1 through 3. And you will display those materials in front of the student and follow the instructions exactly as they are listed in the manual. Listen as I read this word, gum. You move your finger quickly under the word as you say it. The sounds are g, gum. Of importance to note when you are saying the sounds in the words, please say them continuously without pausing between each sound so that, excuse me, it's more natural, like you're reading it off the page. Then it's the student's turn to read some words. If you can't read a word, say the sounds and then read the word. And you point to the first word on the page and say begin. If a student does not know a sound, wait 3 seconds, then point to the next sound and prompt the student to continue. This question has 2 parts. You can see there are the 5 words, and then you turn the page in the materials booklet and ask the students to read some words that are made up. If the student is unable to read any of the sounds in the first 5 words, you discontinue and you do not have to give the students the made up words. So for sake of frustration, skip that piece and then move on to the next question. For scoring, this one is a little more complex because the student is able to receive points for correct letter sounds and also for whole words read. So there are 31 points possible for each correct letter sound that the student makes. So say the student reads wag, rot, cub, fed, zip, zips. They would receive all of the points for correct letter sounds, and they would then have to be scored on whether or not they blended the word correctly or if they were able to read the word correctly without blending. In that case, the student would get 1 point for rag, rot, cub, and fed. They would get 2 points for those words because they were able to read them without blending. They would only receive 1 point for the word zips because they had to blend the sounds in order to read the word. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to someone here at USB and we'd be happy to answer. But I think once you get in and administer the assessment to students and mark those responses in the computer or on your pencil paper score sheet, you'll see that it's relatively easy to score. I would just address it as correct letter sounds, score how many they got, and then go back and score how many words they were able to read or how many words they had to blend. So if you score them as 2 separate sections, it makes it a little bit easier. Again, under the accommodated section for the instructions, this question might not be applicable for students who are deaf or hard of hearing or for students who are nonverbal. If it's not applicable for these students, you can have them skip the question and mark not applicable within the data gateway. Question number 5. This is the emergent reading question, and it requires some materials that are found in the back of your test administration manual on pages 57 through page 60. You can also download the PDF from the USB assessment website. If you need additional copies of it, just print it front to back, cut it apart and staple it together, and you have yourself a cute little book about bugs and about Ned the cat. So this is one question that has changed from last year's administration for the 17-18 school year. We listened to your feedback and we made some changes, and we actually eliminated one of the texts that was previously on question number 5. Now there are only 2 texts for the students to read for this question. If at any time during the reading of the text the student pauses for more than 3 seconds, provide them with the word and then have them continue reading. You do need to know that every time a student reads a word incorrectly, you mark that error. If they read the same word grass wrong all 3 times, you would mark the word grass as an error all 3 times. So the student's going to read the text, and then after they read the story, you remove the text from in front of them and ask them, what is the story about? And what did you see in the grass? So if the student is able to answer at least one of those comprehension questions correctly and read the text with 3 or fewer errors, they will read to the next, or they will read text 2. If they aren't able to read with 3 or fewer errors and cannot answer any of the comprehension questions correctly, then you discontinue and you won't need to score text 2 as any points earned. Excuse me. When you're inside the data gateway, you'll have to score text 1 first, and if they don't meet the criteria to advance to text 2 won't show up for you to score. So that's just kind of an indication as to, hey, I didn't see text 2 for scoring. My student must not have met the benchmarks necessary to advance to read the second text. So in regards to scoring, there are 2 separate sections for this question, one for reading errors and one for reading comprehension. You'll have to mark each section for both texts if they reach text 2. So there's 8 points possible that the student can earn for reading errors and up to 4 points possible for reading comprehension. And within the data gateway, you'll mark the errors that the student actually makes on the text that's displayed in the screen, and it will automatically apply the points earned for you. So that is one nice feature about scoring directly in the data gateway. Okay, up until now, questions 1 through 5 have all been grouping for administration of individual assessment. This is the first question that has a grouping for administration of small group. And you'll see in the test administration manual that is highlighted in yellow in hopes that you pay attention to that grouping for administration. In order to ensure standardization of the assessment, the small group items must be administered in a small group setting. You can't decide, well, for each of my students, I'm going to administer all the questions on this test individually. Questions number 6 and 7 are set as small group administration, and they must be administered in small groups. For question number 6, you will need line paper of your choice, a pencil, and one of the privacy dividers, so that your students are able to copy off of whatever it is their neighbors are writing. This one, the students are just simply going to write the words that you say. If you follow the script on the page, question number 1 says, the first word is pan. Say it with me. Pan. We cook food in a pan. Write the word pan on the first line. So you say the words at a normal talking rate, and you hear that it's repeated multiple times, and probably most students, by the time you finally finish what the instructions are, they will have already written the word down on the paper and they'll be ready to go to the next word. So just make sure you're saying the words at a normal talking rate, that you're not enunciating the individual sounds in the words. And as soon as your students are ready, you can move on to the next word. And the last thing they're going to do for question number 6 is to write a sentence. Write the sentence I say on the next line. The sentence is, Tim is wet. Say it with me. Tim is wet. Write the sentence, Tim is wet, on the next line. And this does give you the option to repeat the sentence as many times as needed, just making sure that you are saying the sentence at a normal talking rate. We don't want to give our kids any clues by slowing down and giving emphasis to certain sounds in the words that they might hear. We want to see the writing that the student is able to produce independently on their own. So once you have finished administering this question, you can collect the student papers and call your next group over and administer the same question to them, or you can score the papers and administer it to a group the next day. But for scoring purposes, please consider a correct response to include reversals and our varied letter formations. The letters don't have to be written perfectly. If they write an H backwards, it's a reversal. They still receive credit for it. Anything that resembles the letter formation as it should be done correctly receives credit, including reversals. There are 17 points possible for each sound spelled correctly. And then they can also receive 1 point for each whole word spelled correctly. So if they spell pan, hot, and sun correctly, but in this sentence they misspell Tim and they misspell wet, They would still get credit for whatever letters are correct in Tim and wet, but they would not receive that additional point for the whole word being spelled correctly. And the last section of scoring is 1 point for a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence, Tim is wet. In order to receive the 1 point, the student must have a capital T, and none of the other letters are allowed to be capitalized. This is showing correct usage of capitalization, and we're looking for just that one capital letter at the beginning of the sentence. You'll see for accommodated instructions, if a student has an orthopedic impairment, they can use the writing tinsel that they use daily. If students are nonverbal, they don't have to repeat the words with you. Actually, any of your students don't have to repeat the words with you. If you're saying the sentence, repeat or say it with me, and the students don't say it with you, that's fine. You can continue on like normal. It's not required that the student responds and repeats the word with you. It's just suggested. Question number 7. This is the second small group item on the assessment, and it has a maximum time allotted for each group. And that maximum time is up to 15 minutes. All students should be done with their response after 15 minutes. Now, this 15 minutes does not include reading through the instructions, reading the story to the students and showing them the pictures, and rereading. So it's going to take a little bit longer than 15 minutes for this question to be administered, including the reading that you do with the students before they begin the writing task. So the time starts once the teacher says, "You may begin." We also took a lot of feedback from the field regarding question number 7, and we changed this question substantially. This student materials booklet includes an entirely new text with brand new pictures. It's completely different than the pictures that we had in the story that talked about animal coverings last year. So make sure you familiarize yourself with this new passage. I'm going to read you some interesting information about trees. Listen carefully. You'll show students the picture in the student materials booklet on page 5 as you read the text to them. Everything that's in the manual under number 1 is included on the student materials page that you see when you display the correct picture for them. So as you're flipping through, you read the text on the page, and when you get to the end, trees are the largest plants on Earth, you say, "Now that we have read about trees, your job is to write about trees and their parts. I am going to read the text one more time so that you can think about what you might want to include in your writing." You read the text one more time, and then you say, "Now it is time to write about trees and their parts, leaves, roots, and trunks." Point to the pictures on page 13 as a reference for students. So they'll see the pictures that you just showed them when you read the story, and you reference them as you're giving them the prompt. Now you pass out the paper and the pencils and the privacy dividers, and you say, "Make sure to include at least 3 details about trees and their parts in your writing and drawing based on the text. Be sure to use a capital letter at the beginning of each sentence and leave spaces between the words. Remember to write before you draw." You say, "You may begin," and the 15 minutes starts. There are a couple of prompts that teachers can provide to students as they are working through this task. If a student starts drawing first, you can prompt the student by saying, "Remember, you need to write first, and then you can draw." Prompt them once, And then if the student continues to draw, then it's going to affect their score because they might run out of time to produce the writing. If the student is working, the teacher can repeat as necessary. Remember to write about and draw trees and their parts, and include at least 3 details based on the text. We gave them the prompt, make sure to include at least 3 details, and you're free to remind them as they are working that they need at least 3 details, and it has to be based on the text. Of note, teachers are not allowed to provide a word bank, nor are they allowed to spell words for students or provide the students with a sentence starter or a stem. This is not something that teachers can do because it would affect the standardization of the item. So please ensure that you are not providing your students with any extra advantage that all of the other students who might take this assessment are getting. Once a student indicates that they are finished, you can use a one-time prompt, looks good, can you add any more details? If the student is sure that they are finished, then the teacher can ask, if necessary, what the student has wrote on their paper, and you can record what the student dictates to you to help clarify what was written if needed. And this will come into play when you look at the scoring section for this item. Question number 7 has 3 separate sections under the scoring part. One for production, one for capitalization, and one for topic and details. Important thing to note, spelling is not scored on this item. That was scored on question number 6, the encoding question. So we're just looking simply at those 3 different sections, and each one of those sections is scored independently of the other sections. So let's look first at production. This is how the student produces their writing, whether it's drawing, dictation, or actual writing, or a combination thereof. There are 5 points possible, and it ranges from providing no response up to the student response is in writing and includes a drawing that is about trees and or their parts. So if the student has the written response with a drawing and it's on trees and their parts, then they would receive the full 5 points for production. If they have a response in writing, but there is not a drawing, then they would only receive 4 points. If they use a combination of dictation and writing/drawing to write about trees and their parts, then they would receive 3 points. So it's really important here to see how the student produced the writing. And hopefully the clarification in the scoring rubric will help to eliminate some of the questions that came up last year. We really tried to provide more succinct instructions and a lot of clarity so that fewer questions were out there about how to score each section. The next one is capitalization. There are 2 points possible. A student uses a capital letter for the first word in the sentence or sentences if they wrote more than one. So every time there's a sentence, the first word has a capital letter, their student would receive 2 points. If the student uses capitals for some of the first words in their sentences, but not all, say they write 4 sentences, 2 of them have capitals at the beginning and 2 of them do not, then they would receive 1 point. 0 points, the student does not use capitals at all, or those capital letters are used inappropriately. So say you write the sentence, trees have trunks, and the sentence, trees have roots. You capitalize trees in both sentences, but you capitalize the word trunk and you capitalize the word root. Those are not words at the beginning of the sentence, so that would be an inappropriate use of capital letters since they're used in the middle of a sentence. The student would receive 0 points. So they either use them correctly on every first word, or they use them correctly on some of the first words and score 1 point, or they don't use them at all, or they're not used appropriately. That would be a score of 0 points. The last section for question number 7 for scoring is topic and details. This is where the quality of the response is scored. This isn't how the student produces the response, whether it's drawing, dictating, or writing. It is the quality of what the response is. So the details in their response must be from the text. The details cannot be scored if they are from student knowledge. So if the student has background knowledge specific to a certain type of tree and that's all that they write about, and they don't include any information from the text, you would say that the response names the topic but does not provide any accurate details from the text. So they would receive 2 points. If the response names the topic of trees and it gives 1 or 2 details about the trees and or their parts, they would receive 3 points. And if they provide a response that names the topic and provides 3 details about trees and or their parts, then the student would receive the full 4 points. So the topic is trees, and the details about trees and or their parts are leaves, roots, and trunks. So it's very clear in the scoring section what the topic is and what the details are that are scoreable, and also the response includes the drawing, the dictation, or writing. So any of those parts of the student's responses are what you would look at to score the topic and details section. There are some accommodations for students who have orthopedic impairments or visual impairments, and that is the end of the literacy section. Next is numeracy. For numeracy, there are 6 questions that cover counting, cardinality, operations and algebraic thinking, and numbers in base 10. And there were some changes to question number 8 from last year's administration to this year's. They're still counting from 12 up to 21 and also from 83 up to 100, but the number of points possible for this item has been scaled so that it isn't as heavy of a percentage of points in the numeracy section as it was last year. So for this item, the student is going to start counting at 12 and count until you tell them to stop, which is at 21. And then they count again at 83, and they count until you tell them to stop, which would be at 100. There are some prompts if the student skip counts. You can tell them to count by ones. If they don't count out loud, you can say count out loud. And then if they start counting at 1, you're allowed to repeat the directions for the student. And if they count backwards from 12, you can say start at 12 and count up. So we tried to cover any situation that we encountered out in field testing if the students didn't count out loud, if they were skip counting. So hopefully you have a prompt there to address any situations that come up. But if after giving one of the corrective prompts and the student still cannot complete the task, then you can say stop and continue to the next part. Or if you're counting from 83 to 100, you can continue to the next question. For scoring this item, it's really quite simple once you put the data into the data gateway, how many points the students can earn. So I'll attempt to explain it based on the scoring that's in the manual. If the student counts all the way up to 21 with no errors, then they would receive 2 points. If they count anywhere between 12 and 20 with at least one number correct, but they cannot successfully count correctly from 12 to 21, they would earn 1 point. If they don't attempt or they get 0 numbers right, they would receive a score of 0. For counting 83 to 100, again, they would get 0 points if there was no attempts or no correct responses. If they were able to count between 83 and 88 with at least one correct number, they would score 1 point. If they are able to accurately count beyond 89 but 100, they would receive 2 points. And a full score of 3 points is if they accurately count from 83 all the way up to 100 with no errors. Again, once you enter the data gateway to put your data in, you'll find that this question is very easily scored. You just mark what number they made a mistake on in counting, or you mark all correct, and it automatically applies the number of points that the student can earn for this question for you. Question number 9 is counting objects. The materials that you need for this question are found in the back of the test administration manual on pages 63 and 64. You can put these in a sheet protector and have the student mark them with a marker, or you can give each individual student their own copy. But they will also need a blank piece of paper and a pencil. So the student will count the objects on the material sheet with the 16 circles, and you'll just say, count the circles, and then after they've counted, tell me how many circles there are. When the student responds, then you would say, now write that number. Allow the student to write the number on a blank piece of paper, and then you would score this item. So for scoring, there are 3 separate parts. There's the counting and one-to-one correspondence, there's the cardinality, and then there's writing the numeral. So for one-to-one correspondence, the student is able to count the number of objects correctly and uses one-to-one correspondence. They would receive the full 2 points. If the student counts the number of objects correctly without using one-to-one correspondence, or they use the one-to-one correspondence but have errors in counting, they would receive only 1 point. So there's 16 circles. Say the student points with one-to-one correspondence and they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17. They would receive 1 point because they had the one-to-one correspondence, but there was an error in counting. So now the next section you score is cardinality. The student correctly tells how many there are without recounting the objects. If the student counted 17 and you say, tell me how many circles there are, and the student responds 17, you would score that as a correct response and they would receive 1 point. That is how many they counted, and they were able to tell you 17 without recounting the objects. If you ask, tell me how many circles there are, and the student has to recount and then responds 16, then they would score 0 points. The cardinality aspect is that ability to recount automatically. The number that you said last is how many there were. If the student then writes the number, if it corresponds with their response to tell me how many there are, they would receive 1 point. So again, if the student miscounts with one-to-one correspondence, say they say 15, and you ask, tell me how many circles there are, and they say 15, and they write the number 15, they would get 1 point for the counting and one-to-one correspondence, 1 point for cardinality, and 1 point for writing the numeral. The numeral does not have to be 16, and the response to tell me how many there are does not have to be 16. It just has to match what they counted when you were looking at the one-to-one correspondence part. The student may or may not point to the objects and the images as they count, but you can see when the students are looking at the objects with their eyes, you can tell that their eyes are moving and tracking them, but it's not a requirement that they point physically with their finger. You can still tell if the student has one-to-one correspondence, regardless if they point directly to the objects in the images as they count. When they write, the numeral reversals are accepted. So if they write a 16 with a 1 and a backward 6, that is acceptable. But if they write 61 instead of 16, that is a transposal, and that is not an acceptable correct answer. So reversals, as far as the number being written backwards, it's fine, but if they trade places with the digits and it creates a different number, then that's not acceptable. There are some accommodated instructions for those students who may need them, and you will repeat this for the number 16, and then again you'll display the triangle material sheet with the 9 triangles on it in front of the student and repeat the same thing. The difference between the circles and the triangles is that one of them is in an array and the other one is scattered. So you're seeing if the student has developed a system to keep track of items that they have or have not counted yet. Question number 10 is identify and compare numerals. For this question, you will need the student material sheet for question number 10, which is found on page 15 of the student materials booklet. You're going to display the student material sheet in front of the question, point to the first set of numbers, and say, tell me the names of these numbers. Wait for the student's response, and then ask, are these numbers equal? Allow the student to respond, then ask, which number is greater? So you're going to score this entire question on if the student is able to identify each numeral, and also if they are able to compare the numbers. So you see that there is 6 and 6 for the second selection of numerals, but you only score 1 point if they are able to identify the numeral 6 correctly. So there's 9 points total for reading the numerals, and then for comparing numerals, the student will get 1 point if they are able to identify equal or not equal, for a total of 5 possible points. And then they would also receive another point if they are able to correctly identify which number is greater than or which number is less than, for a total of 4 points. So this question has a total of 18 points possible, 9 for reading the numerals and 9 for comparing the numbers. If you look in the test administration manual, you will also see that there are pretty lengthy instructions under the accommodated instructions part for students who are nonverbal. And then also there are some accommodated instructions for students with visual impairments or orthopedic impairments as well. Question number 11 is decompose numbers. You will need the student material sheet for question number 11, which is on page 65 of your test administration manual. Again, you can copy or you can use a master copy in a page protector and give your students a marker, but you will also need a collection of 5 identical counters. So what we mean by identical is counters that all look the same and they're one color. So I know some teachers use the chips in their classroom that are red on one side and yellow on the other. You need to make sure that the counters are identical no matter which side they land on. So 2 color counters wouldn't be appropriate for this question. Just keep that in mind when you are selecting your manipulatives. So You're going to place the counters in front of the students along with the paper for them to write their response on, or the master copy sheet with the whiteboard marker for them to write with. You will say, here are 5 counters. Separate the 5 counters into 2 groups. Allow the student time to separate and count their objects. And then you will say, write the numbers in the equation to show how you made 5. Allow the student time to record the equation. If students make more than 2 groups, you can remind them that they need to make only 2 groups. They might make 3 different groups, and then when you say, write the numbers in the equation to show how you made 5, the students may go, oh, and rework their groups so that they no longer have 3, they only have 2, and then write their equation in the blank. That's acceptable. Just know that you still have to ask them to now show a different way to make 5 and write the numbers in the equation that show how you made 5. So if they start with 3 groups, they rearrange them down to 2 and then write the equation, they still have to show a different way to make 5 using 2 groups. There are acceptable responses of 5 equals 4 plus 1, 5 equals 1 plus 4, 5 equals 2 plus 3, 5 equals 3 plus 2. If the student is unable to decompose using 5 counters, you are going to move on to question number 12 and not ask them to decompose with 8 counters. So this question actually has 2 parts as well. They decompose with 5 and write the equations, and then they decompose with 8 and write the equations. So there are 4 points possible for each decomposition with objects, 2 for 5 counters and then 2 for 8 counters, and then there are 4 points possible for each written equation to match decomposition. So if they decompose the groups into 4 and 1, and then they write 5 equals 0 plus 5, they receive credit for decomposition with objects, but they do not receive credit because the written equation does not match their decomposition. So the equations must match their decomposition in order to receive points for those equations for both 5 counters and 8 counters. There are accommodated instructions on the bottom of the page for question number 11 for orthopedic or visually impaired students that you may follow. And question number 12 is composing and decomposing team numbers. For this question, you'll need the response sheet on page 66 in your test administration manual, either again copied for the students or in a sheet protector, and you are going to display the material sheet for the students and say, show the number 13 as 10 ones and some more ones by drawing circles and these 10 frames. Allow the student to respond and then say, finish the equation to show 13 as 10 ones and some more ones. If the student models 13 in the 10 frame correctly, they would score 1 point. And if they wrote an equation using the 13 equals blank plus blank, then they would receive 1 credit for correctly writing that equation. If the student puts 8 circles in the first box and 5 circles in the second box, they would not receive credit because they are not showing 13 as 10 ones and some more ones. They need to have 10 ones in one of the 10 frames and more ones in the other. If they put 3 circles in the 10 frame and then 10 circles in the second 10 frame, they would receive credit because that is a depiction of 10 ones and more ones. If you look in the test administration manual on page 37 in the sample record of response, it shows that the student drew 10 ones in the first box and then 6 ones in the second box. They did not receive credit for either modeling in the 10 frame correctly or writing the equation correctly because they only had 16 instead of 18. So the response has to match either 13 or 18, and the equation has to show it as 10 ones plus more ones. There are accommodated instructions if necessary, and also a discontinue rule. If they cannot decompose 13, then you skip 18 and move on to question number 13. Do not make the student attempt something and increase their frustrational level. Just simply discontinue, record a score of 0 for 18, and move on to question number 13. For question number 13, this is addition and subtraction word problems. You need a set of manipulatives. Whatever you use in your class normally is fine. You also need a blank piece of paper and a pencil for the student. And then you say, after you hand them their supplies, I'm going to give you some word problems to solve. Use your fingers, objects, drawings, or equations to show how you solve the problems. And then you say, Carla has 3 big apples and 4 small apples. How many apples does Carla have? Allow the student to solve the problem, and you are free to repeat the problem as necessary. If the student says, can you please say that for me again? Or they draw 3 apples and then they look at you with a confused look, you can repeat the word problem as much as necessary in order for them to solve it. They can use drawings. The representations can be a verbal response, their fingers. They can use the manipulatives. They can write the numerals, or they can even write an equation. So they would receive 3 points for each representation created, and they would also receive 1 point for each correct answer. So there are 3 separate word problems that you're going to give the student. If they just state an answer, then you can ask them to show you how they know with their fingers, objects, drawings, or an equation to represent their thinking. If they don't start to work at all, you can say, can you solve this problem? And repeat the problem as necessary. If they don't attempt to solve the problem after 3 prompts, record a score of 0 and proceed to the next word problem. When it comes to scoring, the students are allowed to self-correct, and those self-corrects are counted if they are indeed a correct, self-correct as a correct answer. There is a rubric on page 39 for this question, and it says that if a student does not attempt a representation, they get 0 points. There was some question from the field last year regarding the difference between an inaccurate and a partially accurate representation, so this rubric tried to clarify some of that for us. If they use random numbers or their drawings, their fingers, their manipulatives don't match the problem by 2 or more, or the wrong operation is used. So say it's an addition problem and they do subtraction, they would receive 1 point for an inaccurate representation. A partially accurate representation would include their drawings, or if they use their fingers, manipulatives, they have 1 more or 1 less than the expected response, or if they use more than 1 representation and one of the representations is wrong. So say they count on their fingers and they use their fingers correctly, but they draw a picture of apples and the picture is incorrect, they would receive 2 points because it's only a partially accurate representation. And in order to receive full points, it has to be a correct and accurate representation. And you can see in the test administration manual under the rubric, it says that representations may include a verbal response, using their fingers, using manipulatives, drawing, writing, numerals, or even writing an equation. If you need additional guidance, there is some supplemental information available on the assessment website at schools.utah.gov/assessment/assessments, and then you're going to have to click on the kindergarten tab to access that information. That is the end of the literacy numeracy section. When the profile is complete, you thank the student for participating, and then you continue on to fill out the social emotional observation inventory. This is based on standards that are listed on this page, and it is behaviors exhibited by the student within the last month of school. So you're going to look at how the student scores on opportunities to respond based on the last month of your observations. These are the same questions that you encountered on the Keep entry, same instructions and scoring as on the entry. We just don't collect this data at the state level. Your district or charter may ask you to input it into another system for collection on the district end, but the state does not collect this data. Now that you have finished administration of the Keep assessment, we have to get the data into the data gateway. So who is able to enter the data? That's ultimately a local decision. If your district or charter says the teachers administer the Keep assessment and our literacy team will put the data in, or vice versa, the literacy team administers, the teacher puts the data in, whatever decision that is made at your local level is what ultimately will come into play. But kindergarten teachers are automatically going to be able to enter their own data based on their user role within the data gateway. Other personnel can be given access from the district or charter school assessment director, and the role that they will need to have in order to administer or to enter the data into the data gateway is assessment school user. To get to the data gateway, you'll need to navigate to the website that you see listed here on the page. It's https://datagateway.schools.utah.gov. And you will have to have a login in order to sign into the website. You can see on the screen here, it's highlighted in yellow. If you have a login, great, you click the login button. If you don't, you have to click on register to complete the registration process, and it will ask you for your Cactus ID and some other miscellaneous information in order to register. So make sure that if you're not registered, you have your Cactus ID handy. Once you have registered, you may automatically be assigned a role, or the assessment director for your district or charter will have to assign you a user role. When you log in this blue box right here you see on the screen, it says My Tools. If you have been assigned a user role and you are logged in, you will see this My Tools box on the bar. If you don't see the My Tools box and you're signed in, then you don't have a user role assigned to you. You will have to reach out directly to your assessment director, charter, or district where you work, and they will have to help you with this. This isn't something that USBE can help you with. We can't assign user roles. So make sure you reach out directly to your assessment director who can help you with this process. So once you're all logged in and you have a My Tools button, you're going to click the My Tools button and it'll drop down where it says right here, Keep Results. You're going to click on the Keep Results tab. When you click on Keep Results, it's going to populate for you your district on the left side and your school, excuse me, and it will say across the top, keep results for whatever the name of your school is. So you want to make sure that first you've clicked on the Exit Profile tab right here highlighted in blue with the number 1. Click there first, and then it will pull up this green box that says Student Exit Scores. You're going to click on the green box that says Student Exit Scores. And this is similar to what your data gateway is going to look like when you log in, except you'll see the actual students in your classroom that have real first names, real last names, and real SSIDs. And then you'll see all of the same other information that's on this page here. Just verify at the top first that you are in the correct tab. So if you give your students the regular Keep assessment at exit, you're going to want to make sure you're in the exit scores tab. There are two different ways that you can enter the data into the data gateway. One of them is by clicking on the live scoring button. Click this button if you are sitting down with a student and you are administering these questions live with the student as you're going through and marking the responses in the data gateway. This option is great, and we're going to talk about specifically why you would want to choose this over data entry on the next couple of slides. But data entry is only to be used when you're entering data from a pencil paper scoring, and I'll cover the reasons why in the next few slides. This is what the data gateway looks like when you click on live. So back to the previous screen, inside the red box, you can click on the word live and it'll take you to a screen that looks like this. You'll see on the screen that it has all of the information that appears in the test administration manual. It lists the standard alignments, the grouping for administration, and here's where you would mark the scores based upon the student responses. You also see these tabs down here where it says instructions, scoring, and accommodated instructions. Looks just like it does in the test administration manual. You click on that instructions bar and it pulls up all the instructions. You click on the scoring bar and it pulls up all of the scoring information that comes directly out of the test administration manual. If you don't want to see that section, then you just click on the bar again and it'll collapse it, and you'll just go straight to where you enter the student responses. So say the student was able to answer in a complete sentence after I provided them with a prompt, you would score 1 point. Click on the radio button next to the 1 and then score, oh, they gave 2 accurate examples of signs of spring from the story with prompting. So they would receive 3 points for that. And then you would click the next button and it would advance to question number 2. Now, since the student is sitting next to you, you're able to advance through each question one at a time and pull up the instruction section, or say you have a student that needs accommodated instructions, you could also pull up those. But every time you click the next button, it automatically saves the responses up to that point. So say you're in the middle of testing a student and the power goes out, your computer shuts off, you lose internet connection. Wherever you were the last time you hit the next button, your responses are saved. So you don't have to worry about losing student answers. Excuse me. This is what the data gateway looks like if you click on the data entry button. So back to this screen. You're on the main page where it says exit scores at the top. If I click data entry, that means I've sat down with my little friend that I already gave the assessment to. I have their pencil paper score sheet in front of me. I click on the data entry piece. Now I just go through and I make the selections on this web page based on the answers that the student provided that I have on my pencil paper score sheet. Now, the catch here is when you get down to the bottom, there is a save and submit option. This is the only time that this interacts with the data gateway. So say I pull a student in and I'm giving them the assessment as I'm going through and marking the answers on the data entry screen. If it takes longer than I think it's 10 minutes, that the data gateway times out if you don't interface with it. If it takes longer than that 10 minutes, when you finish the assessment, you get down to the bottom and you click either save or submit, it's going to give you this error, and it's going to say an error occurred, and then you're going to sign back into the data gateway, and all of the responses that you put on this page are not going to be there. So only use the data entry part if you have pencil paper score sheets in front of you, and then you just rapidly go through and select the appropriate responses. It's much easier than scrolling through question by question if the student's not sitting there with you taking the assessment. One thing to note, you're going to mark those incorrect responses where it says record of response. So I can click on the Y if they got the Y wrong, and the SH if they got the SH wrong, and then it'll automatically populate the total number of points that the student earned for you. You can also select, oh, they got all of these correct, or they got all of these wrong. Now you'll see question number 2 was one of those questions that had the option of it not being applicable. If you click on not applicable as a response, it will pop up with this window that says submit not applicable. This question may not be applicable for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. By clicking submit, I confirm that this student is deaf or hard of hearing and has allowable accommodations in their IEP or 504 plan. If they do, then in fact you can click the submit button. If you accidentally click not applicable and you read that and you're like, no, this student can do it, they don't have a 504 plan, then you hit cancel and make the correct choices and then proceed to the next question. Just know that we will prompt you and ask if it really truly is a not applicable situation, and then when the student's score is calculated, they will receive an asterisk for that literacy section because you selected not applicable as one of the responses. You also need to look at the very top of the page where it has this tiny little text and a little checkbox that says accommodation. If you are giving any accommodated instructions on this assessment for any single question, you must check this box right here that indicates you gave those accommodated instructions. So if it is in fact not applicable, select submit and you can continue on with the assessment. When you get down to the bottom, you have 2 choices. You have save or you have submit. If you click save, it will simply save your data, take you back to the main screen, and the data has not been submitted. If you are in fact sure 100% that all these answers are correct and you are ready to submit, you will click the submit button. You can see down here that it says, please answer all questions. So I went into the data gateway, I clicked submit, and please answer all questions. So it should take you back up to the section of the assessment that is missing answer choices. You cannot click submit if there are missing answers. So what happened is I clicked all correct for this question number 6 on the encoding question, but I also have to go here and click a radio button response for each word that was spelled correctly. So remember, they get 1 point for all correct letters and then an additional point if the whole word is spelled correctly. And then this last one down here if Tim is capitalized. So you cannot click submit if you are missing answers. And if you click submit and nothing happens, it's most likely because you're missing an answer somewhere. So scroll up through the questions and try to find the one that is missing a response. So within the data gateway, I'm going to scroll back and show you this one page. You see across the top that there's a tab for entry, exit, and then alternate entry, alternate exit. And there are other various options that you can pick from. If you give the student the keep alt, then you will need to enter their data on the alt entry or alt exit scores depending on the time of the year it is. So in this case, it would be alt exit scores. You'll notice that those students who are receiving instruction in the kindergarten essential elements for English language arts and mathematics, those alternate standards, that it's going to look very different from the regular keep. So just make sure that you are in fact clicking on the correct spot. There are a couple new features this year. There's a historical report available depending on your user level access. You can have a report of data from previous test administration, times of year, entry or exit, this school year, last school year. Again, what information is available to you in that historical report depends on your user level access. And then this item analysis here, if you click on that, it will generate a list of every single question and all student responses, and you can filter by many different things. So say I want to know how many students were able to capitalize the word Tim on question number 6. So I would scroll down to question 6 and I would select the response, capitalize the word Tim, and it would filter all of the students that were able to, and then you can provide targeted instruction for those students that might need a little extra support in various areas of literacy or numeracy skills. So those are just a couple of things to take note of. Now we're going to look at the individual student reports. Once you have gone into the data gateway and submitted the profile for a student, you will see that there is a lock next to the word view and then a little graph that says student report. If you do not see a lock or a student report, then that student's profile has not yet been submitted. Please make sure that you have gone back into your data gateway and you have checked to make certain that every student in your class, the last 4 weeks of kindergarten, has their scores entered and submitted. If you're missing the lock, go back in and it will give you the option to save or submit. Make sure you click submit so that that data is in fact finalized. Once you have submitted the student scores, you can click next to each individual student where it says student report, or if you want to do it a little bit faster, you can click up here on the download box and then click the PDF where it says individual student scores, and it will populate these same student reports that you access by clicking on each individual student. It will just download it all into one PDF rather than you having to click on each individual student and access their report. So 2 different ways to access the same report. You can print a whole class set from the download option or each individual student from the student report option next to their name. For reporting the cut scores for exit, level 3 is considered kindergarten proficiency at exit. So if they score between 102 and 124 points on literacy, they are considered to be a level 3. And then you can see proficiency also for numeracy is a level 3. So for between 45 and 55 points is proficiency for exit reporting. These numbers are included on the report that you get by clicking on either the individual student scores under download or student report next to each individual student's name. It does give you the performance level descriptors for each level 1, 2, and 3, and the cut points to be considered a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3 for both literacy here at the top and numeracy here at the bottom. So each individual student who has a keep score submitted will have instant access to their individual student report. It also shows each question and the response that the student provided for literacy and also again for numeracy. So here you can see across the top it provides a bar. The red section is a level 1, the yellow section is level 2, and the green section is a level 3, and the little dot shows where the student fell, and also in parentheses next to it, the score that the child received for literacy and for numeracy. And you can go over this report with parents and explain to them what this means and areas that they can provide additional support for their children at home. It gives all questions, all responses for literacy and for numeracy. And it is very helpful if the teacher talks to the parent about the report. Some things aren't very clear because the parents aren't familiar with the assessment and they might not understand, for example, question number 9, what counting in one-to-one correspondence means. So I suggest, it's just a recommendation from USB, that this comes with some conversation surrounding the information included on the report with parents, not just a simple, here's your student report. It doesn't give any kind of description other than overall performance level descriptors of the basic information. It doesn't give any item level analysis or explanation to parents. So that's all for the entering of the data into the data gateway. And the last thing that we have to talk about is what you'll find in the appendix is accommodations. So on pages 46 through 49 in your test administration manual, there are typical accommodations and accessibility features that are accessible for any state assessment in Utah. So if your student has a 504 plan or an IEP plan and there are these accessibility features or resources, the accommodations for students with disabilities, if they have these in their IEP or 504 plan, they are allowable on the KEEP assessment, both entry and exit for those students with the accommodations listed in their plans. We also have Braille and large print assessment materials available. If you need any of those assessment materials, you can feel free to reach out to Tracy Gooley, and she can help you find that materials that you need for the assessment. There's an oral translation accommodation in Appendix A. It applies specifically to just the translation of directions. Directions, it refers to non-item content that appears at the beginning of the test or between testing sessions. It's not referring to an item stem or directions for answering a specific question. It's the same as the KEEP entry. If you have students in your classroom who have significant cognitive disabilities and are unable to access the regular KEEP, those would be these students who are in the essential elements for English language arts and mathematics or alternate achievement standards, then those students may access the KEEP alternate assessment. This is an IEP team determination. It's not something that the individual classroom teacher can decide on their own, so make sure the team decision is known by all parties invested in this alternate assessment students. And if you need materials for that, they can be found at the assessment website listed on the link. You can also just navigate to schools.utah.gov assessments, and click on the kindergarten tab and it'll take you. And there's information about the KEEP entry, information about the KEEP exit, and also the alternate materials that you might need. There is your first point of contact for any KEEP related questions should always be the district or charter assessment director. If you need help with entering into the data gateway, you can't get in, you don't have the appropriate user role, your first point of contact should always be your assessment director because they have the answers and they're probably more readily accessible than some folks here are at USBE. But if you can't seem to find answers to questions that you have, we are certainly happy to help. Myself, Liz Williams, is listed the first contact. You can also reach out to the elementary and secondary math specialist, Whitney Barlow, or the coordinator of assessment and development, Cindy Carter. And if you have specific questions about the accommodations pieces or the alternate assessment, Tracy Gooley's contact information is right here on the screen as well. So again, thank you for participating in this webinar, and you can consider yourself a trained assessor for the KEEP exit. If you need additional testing materials, they are also available on the USB assessment website, and along with other training videos and specific things related to both the KEEP entry, exit, and also the alternate. So feel free to reach out to any of the people listed on the screen if you have any questions. We will be happy to help, and thanks for participating.